He was known as Old Kinderhook. Born in the Dutch-speaking region of New York's Hudson Valley, he is the only president who learned English as a second language. He was a lawyer who became one of the most influential politicians in New York State. He was a senator, governor of New York, secretary of state, minister to the United Kingdom, and vice president in President Jackson's second term. His term as president was dominated by the economic crisis of the Panic of 1837. He refused to admit Texas to the Union, concerned about inflaming sectional tensions. He was defeated for re-election by William Henry Harrison. He nearly received the Democratic presidential nomination 4 years later, but was denied the nomination due to his continued opposition to the annexation of Texas. He became ardently anti-slavery, and 4 years later received the presidential nomination of the Free Soil Party. He became something of an elder statesman and supported President Lincoln's policies during the Civil War. He is our nation's 8th chief executive, Martin Van Buren. Let's take a look at a map of eastern New York and some sites associated with Martin Van Buren. This part of New York is known as the Hudson River Valley, from New York City extending up towards Albany, and this was formerly part of New Netherland up until about 120 years or so before Martin Van Buren's birth. And even in Van Buren's early life, this was largely a Dutch-speaking area. Van Buren, in fact, spoke Dutch as his first language and learned English in school as a second language. He was born in Kinderhook, which is in this general area just to the south of Albany. Certainly he spent a lot of time in the state capital of Albany as a lawyer, as a member of the state legislature, and as a leader of the political machine of the 1820s, the Albany Regency. Well, his estate Lindenwald is in Kinderhook and can be visited today. He's also buried in Kinderhook Cemetery, so all in this region. Let's take a look at some photos associated with these sites. Let's take a look at some books in my collection pertaining to Martin Van Buren and the times in which he lived. This book is called Martin Van Buren, Law, Politics, and the Shaping of Republican Ideology. It's by Jerome Mushkat and Joseph C. Rayback, and it was published in 1997. And the book deals with the early career of Martin Van Buren as an attorney and as an important figure in New York State politics. And it shows the influence of Jefferson and Madison and their classic Republican ideology and how it influenced Van Buren's early career in law and politics. Another important event that happened during the Van Buren administration is told in this book. It's by Howard Jones, and it's Mutiny on the Amistad. Now, this was originally published in 1987. This edition was released in 1997 at the time that the movie Amistad came out. But it's a story that actually happened of a slave ship. The captive Africans took over. It was a Spanish ship in the Caribbean, and they tried to steer it back to Africa, and it went up the coast of the United States and was captured by a U.S. ship. And basically the Africans in the U.S. court were suing for their freedom, and it went to the Supreme Court. The argument by the Spanish was that the slaves were the Spanish property and should be returned to them. The Van Buren administration sided with the Spanish. The argument on the other side, on the defense, is that they were illegally captured for sale in the Americas, and therefore they were legitimately citizens of another country and should be returned to their country of origin. And in the Supreme Court, it was former President John Quincy Adams who defended the African captives and won the case. So I have to say, in that movie, President Van Buren isn't portrayed very positively. It's somewhat ironic in that, certainly as a former president, Van Buren became associated with the abolitionist movement in the lead up to the Civil War. Our next program will feature our nation's ninth president, William Henry Harrison.